The air in Fort Custer, Michigan smelled nothing like the humid, metallic scent of the Pacific Eleanor Ellie Vance had grown used to. It smelled of cut grass, old wood, and the faint, dull aroma of Army chow, the scent of America in late 1945. Ellie stood ramrod straight. 27 years old, a staff sergeant returned from nearly 3 years in the thick of things. Her Japanese language skills had placed her on remote islands, often translating vital documents right behind the front lines. She'd seen what war could do, but she'd come home whole, strong, and ready for whatever the Army needed next. What the Army needed, apparently, was a glorified file clerk. Ellie was assigned to the Debriefing and Repatriation Command, a sprawling unit processing returning servicemen and captured enemy materials. She reported to Major Hayes, a man who had spent the war safely behind a large oak desk in Washington and seemed to view anyone who had actually tasted combat as a necessary annoyance. "Vance?" Major Hayes barked without looking up from his cigarette, the smoke curling around the bare light bulb above his head. "Glad to see you made it back in one piece. We've had your file reviewed? Impressive work, but this isn't the islands. We need quiet efficiency here." Ellie felt the familiar tightening in her jaw. "Sir, I was commended for my efficiency and my ability to handle sensitive translation work overseas. I'd appreciate an assignment that utilizes my Japanese fluency and intelligence background." Hayes finally looked up, his eyes sweeping over her uniform, resting dismissively on the faint trace of dust she'd never quite scrubbed from her combat boots. He offered a slow, patronizing smirk. "Sergeant Vance, out in the field, maybe your particular skills were useful, but here we handle men's sensitive stories. We need stability. You'll be in the records annex, filing testimonies. A place where you can't get in trouble, understand?" Ellie swallowed the retort she desperately wanted to deliver. The list of dangerous assignments she'd completed, the respect she'd earned from men who were actually there. But she was a soldier. She simply clicked her heels together. "Understood, Major." The insult felt like a cold slap. She was emotionally strong, known for her steady hands and clear mind under pressure. Yet, here in the safety of her home country, her accomplishments were dismissed because she was a woman. She walked away from the major's office, the heavy weight of her orders settling on her shoulders. She was underestimated, mocked, and placed in a corner, but Ellie Vance never stayed in a corner for long. She knew her worth even if the brass didn't. She walked toward the records annex, determined to prove that even simple filing could be done with the diligence of a frontline intelligence officer. The records annex was a vast, echoing chamber filled with steel shelves and the scent of aging paper. It was tedious work, sorting, dating, and cataloging thousands of returning soldier debriefings, most of which were unremarkable accounts of boredom and homesickness. 2 weeks passed in a dull routine, confirming Major Hayes's intent to bury her talent. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a runner delivered a manila envelope sealed with 3 strips of red confidential tape. It wasn't a standard debriefing. The cover sheet was marked with a code Ellie had only seen used for the highest level of human intelligence operations. Operation Quiet Harbor. Inside, the paperwork detailed the arrival of a small, highly sensitive group of civilian women who had been rescued from a distant, isolated corner of the Pacific. Their origins were varied, Korean, Chinese, Filipina, but their shared horror was immediately clear from the cryptic, cautious language of the field reports. They were referred to in the documents by the chilling euphemism the Japanese military had used, Special R&R personnel. Ellie immediately understood. These were the women the world would later call comfort women, victims of systematic, horrific abuse by the Japanese Imperial Army. They had been transported to Fort Custer not for clerical processing, but for deep, careful debriefing away from the media and the public eye. The files explained the severe trauma the women carried, and the deep, cultural fear of shame that made them almost impossible to interview. The initial reports from the field officers were filled with frustration. Subjects refused to speak, too emotionally disturbed for effective testimony. Recommend closing file due to lack of usable intelligence. Major Hayes's handwritten note was scrawled across the final summary. Transfer to records annex, classified buried. Ellie gripped the paper. This wasn't clerical work. This was Major Hayes deliberately silencing these women and classifying their suffering as a failed intelligence operation. The injustice burned through her initial resentment. These women had suffered unimaginable sacrifice, and now their chance at justice was being tossed onto a dusty shelf. Suddenly, a new set of orders clipped to the file caught her eye. Interpreter required for final attempt at intake. Must be non-judgmental, female, and proficient in regional dialects. Assignment: Staff Sergeant E. Vance. Hayes must have realized that only someone with her specific language expertise could even attempt this. He'd probably intended for her to fail, providing final justification for the burial. Ellie looked at the first name on the list of survivors: Yumi. The name, written in clear, precise English letters, seemed to jump off the page. Ellie felt a sudden surge of purpose, not for the army, but for Yumi. Her strength, which had been dismissed by the major, was exactly what these survivors needed. This wasn't just a mission. It was a chance at redemption for the entire system that had failed them. Ellie's new assignment took her away from the dusty annex and into a secluded, small house on the edge of the base, cordoned off by a thin wire fence, the designated intake facility for Operation Quiet Harbor. The atmosphere inside was hushed, almost reverent. The American military police assigned to guard the facility treated the women with extraordinary quiet respect. This surprised Ellie. Despite the dismissal she faced from Major Hayes, the lower-ranking men seemed to grasp the true gravity of the situation. Ellie met the lead medic, Lieutenant Wallace, a kind-faced woman from Texas. "Sergeant Vance, thank goodness you're here," Wallace whispered. "They expected us to treat them like prisoners of war or worse. They're scared of us, but they're most scared of the shame back home. We don't pressure them. We just offer hot food, clean clothes, and a safe room." The encounter with Yumi happened later that evening. Yumi was small, frail, and wore a simple dress provided by the Red Cross. She sat on the edge of a chair, staring at the floor. When Ellie entered, Yumi flinched, instinctively bracing herself for the harsh interrogation she was conditioned to expect. Ellie didn't sit across a table. Instead, she knelt beside the chair, placing the official notebook and pen on the floor, making herself vulnerable and equal. She began speaking in gentle, unaccented Japanese, not asking questions, but simply stating facts. "My name is Ellie. I am a soldier, like the others you have seen, but I am here only as a listener. You are safe now. You have done nothing wrong. The people who hurt you were the criminals. We only want to record your story if and when you are ready." "You are in charge here." Yumi raised her eyes slowly. The expectation in them was not of violence, but of contempt, the contempt she had always received. She had braced for mockery, for judgment, for the cold paperwork of military bureaucracy. Instead, she saw Ellie's face, a face of pure, unadulterated empathy. Ellie simply waited, offering a slight, reassuring nod. Yumi eventually whispered something in a local dialect, her voice barely audible. Ellie, using her expertise, translated it flawlessly for Lieutenant Wallace. "She asks why we do not insult her. She says the guards gave her fresh towels. She says she has never been treated like a person since the war started." Ellie spoke back, her voice steady. "Here you are not a prisoner. You are not a number. You are a survivor. You are a human being, and your story matters." Over the next few days, Ellie treated every interview not as an intelligence debriefing, but as a sacred trust. She documented their stories not just in clinical terms, but with the emotional weight they deserved. The women, stunned by this unexpected dignity, by the simple human kindness of clean sheets, a hot cup of tea, and a compassionate listener, began to speak. Ellie had unlocked the truth that Major Hayes had wanted to bury. Part 4. The fight for the truth Ellie worked tirelessly, translating the testimonies, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. The details were horrifying, but the women's bravery in recounting them was a blinding light. She compiled the documents, now dozens of pages thick, into a comprehensive report demanding justice and reparations. When she presented the finished file, Major Hayes's reaction was swift and furious. He slammed the thick file onto his desk. "Vance, I told you to bury this file. What is this nonsense?" "Emotional weight?" I asked for intelligence, not a sob story for the newspapers. This is unusable! Sir, Ellie stated, her voice dangerously calm, this is the most comprehensive account we have of Japanese war crimes in that region. The testimonies are consistent. They are verified by the scars on their bodies. This is not a sob story, Major. This is evidence. It is a political grenade, Sergeant, and you are far too junior to understand the chain reaction it will set off, Hayes snarled. I need a simple finding. Subjects too unreliable, disturbed to provide actionable intelligence. That's your official recommendation. Rewrite it now. I cannot, sir. That would be a lie. It would be a profound disrespect to the women who sacrificed their trust to tell me the truth. Ellie's voice didn't tremble. The courage she had learned in the Pacific was now facing a different kind of enemy, cowardice and corruption. Hayes stared at her, his face dark red. You think you're a hero, Vance? You're a filing clerk who got lucky with her language skills. This is a direct order. Rewrite the conclusion, or I will see that you are discharged with a dishonorable mark on your service record. Ellie stood her ground. She knew this was the moment of sacrifice. She could cave and save her career, or she could stand firm and fight for the women who had finally found the strength to trust her. Major Hayes, she said, looking him directly in the eye, I will not rewrite the truth. Hayes lunged for the phone. You're off the assignment, effective immediately. Get back to the annex. As she turned to leave, Ellie's eyes darted to a small, open folder partially hidden beneath Hayes's cigar box. It was another confidential file marked with an old pre-war seal. On the top sheet, she caught 2 words. Trial Prep, Defendant, Lieutenant Commander R. Hayes. The file was addressed not to the major, but to a high-ranking military lawyer. Hayes was not just dismissing the case. He was protecting someone named Hayes. Ellie realized the cover-up wasn't just about avoiding a political mess. It was about protecting a family name or a personal connection implicated in war crimes. Her heart hammered, fueled by a new sharp sense of purpose. She had to find out who and why. The next day, Ellie was back in the monotonous silence of the records annex, sorting routine payroll records, but her mind was racing. She knew she had to find the link between Major Hayes and the war crimes exposed in the testimonies. She also knew Hayes was watching her every move. Her strength was not brute force, but patience and precision. She began working late, staying behind after the other clerks left, pretending to organize deep storage files. Every night, she methodically searched the restricted archives, using the unique filing codes she had memorized from her intelligence training. It took 3 nights. On the 4th, buried deep in a drawer labeled Pending Administrative Reviews, she found what she was looking for. It was a transfer request from 1943, signed by a Captain Thomas Hayes, Major Hayes's older brother, a man who had served as an administrative officer in Southeast Asia. Attached to the transfer request was a cryptic internal memo from a unit near where the women had been held. The memo detailed unauthorized personnel movements and discretionary procurement of services supervised by Captain Hayes. It wasn't direct evidence of abuse, but it was evidence of complicity and cover-up. The women's testimonies referenced a high-ranking American who had profited off the women's misery while posing as a legitimate supplier. The shock was a physical punch to the stomach. Major Hayes wasn't trying to protect the Army's reputation. He was protecting his family's reputation and his brother's pension. If the victims' testimonies went public, the names they mentioned, including a tall American officer with a nervous twitch and expensive cigars, would align perfectly with the administrative reports about Captain Thomas Hayes. Ellie had to move fast. She couldn't photocopy the restricted documents without detection, and she couldn't risk stealing them. She sat down, her hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her, and did what she did best: precise documentation. She spent an hour meticulously transcribing the key details, dates, file numbers, and unique reference codes onto a thin sheet of paper she folded into her blouse pocket. She also knew she couldn't simply go over Major Hayes's head. He had friends in high places. She needed to present the evidence to someone who was incorruptible, outside the immediate chain of command, and who cared about military honor. She remembered Lieutenant Wallace, the medic. A woman whose gentle care of the survivors was a testament to her moral fortitude. Wallace wasn't intelligent, but she was a direct witness to the victim's suffering and Ellie's integrity. Ellie made a plan. She would use the pre-dawn quiet to deliver the damning evidence to the lieutenant, trusting her to know the right channels. This was the ultimate risk. If Major Hayes found out, she would be facing a court-martial for insubordination and accessing classified material. But for Yumi and the others, it was a risk she had to take. Ellie delivered the documents to Lieutenant Wallace at 5 a.m., just as the sun was painting the eastern sky in soft pink and orange. Wallace listened to Ellie's calm, detailed explanation, her face growing grimmer with every file number Ellie quoted. "You are risking everything, Sergeant," Wallace whispered, clutching the folded paper. "But you're right. This is justice." Wallace, using a protected medical channel, bypassed the command structure and delivered the transcribed evidence and Ellie's original, powerful testimony report to a colonel in the Inspector General's office, a man known for his strict adherence to the rule of law. The result was a silent, powerful explosion. 2 days later, Major Hayes arrived at his office to find two stern-faced colonels waiting for him. They weren't there to congratulate him on his war efforts. They were there with a file containing dates, quotes, and names, all cross-referenced to documents Ellie had meticulously copied. The evidence of his deliberate suppression of war crime testimony to protect his family was undeniable. Ellie was summoned back to Hayes's office late that afternoon. She expected a final desperate verbal assault. Instead, she found Colonel Stern of the Inspector General's office sitting behind the desk. Hayes was gone. "Staff Sergeant Vance," the colonel said, his voice deep but respectful. "Major Hayes has been relieved of command and transferred pending a full investigation. Captain Thomas Hayes is under immediate review based on new evidence. Your evidence." He slid Ellie's original report across the desk. It was no longer marked buried. It was marked accepted, vital to prosecution. "Your initial commander," the colonel continued, "stated that you were too emotionally invested and unsuited for serious intelligence work. But your strength, Sergeant Vance, was precisely because you were emotionally invested. You treated those survivors with dignity, and in return they gave you the truth that the bureaucracy was trying to hide." Ellie finally allowed herself a small, powerful smile. It wasn't just about her. The ultimate satisfying twist was not personal revenge, but institutional redemption. Ellie Vance was immediately promoted and transferred to a new, elite unit tasked with gathering testimony for war crime tribunals. Her first assignment, to officially process and safeguard the testimonies of Yumi and the other women. The story concluded not with a battle won on some foreign shore, but with a quiet, profound victory in the heart of America. Ellie Vance, the underestimated filing clerk, had ensured that the quiet dignity the American soldiers had offered the survivors would become a permanent, loud record of truth and a step toward justice for all. She had finally earned the respect she deserved, not through firepower, but through unwavering integrity and empathy. This concludes the 6-part story.